Thank you. My name is Joseph Kamara, and I'm the Regional Director for Humanitarian Affairs in Southern Africa region. I work for World Vision.
When you say the regional director for Southern Africa, how many countries come under that? How many countries are you looking at, I guess?
Well, in Southern Africa, we operate in 9 countries. That includes DR Congo, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Angola, South Africa, Swaziland, Lesotho, Mozambique, and Zambia. Yeah.
Just so everyone knows, so just try and look at Sakshi the whole time.
I look at her.
Yeah, avoid the camera.
Oh, okay. Others tell me to look at the camera, so now I have to look at you.
Should we do that again then?
Yeah, if you want. Yeah.
Sure. Could you please state your name once again for
My
listeners?
name's fine.
Oh, name. Okay. So tell me how many regions come under your particular remit with World Vision?
In Southern Africa, World Vision operates in 9 countries, and the countries are DR Congo, Angola, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Lesotho, Mozambique, South Africa, and Swaziland, currently called Eswatini.
Wow. Now, Joseph, you were in Mozambique when Cyclone Idai and Cyclone Kenneth hit at the beginning of the year. Talk to us about the first week or the first 3 days. What was happening on the ground once the cyclone hit?
Yeah. Well, it was a difficult situation. The first 3 days, nobody could get into the most affected area. That's the city of Beira. Couldn't get in or out because roads were cut off. Airport was closed. There was no other means to get into the area. So it took time to clear debris from the airport and put it back, temporarily rehabilitate the runway to allow fast aircrafts to come in. But I was probably on the second aircraft to go in, and it was like an apocalypse, I would say. About 90% of the buildings had been destroyed with their roof blown off. Trees were down, villages were submerged, some of the parts of the city of Beira were submerged. It was raining heavily. It was difficult. We didn't have where to work from or where to sleep. We all operated from the airport hangar, and we were like 200 people at the airport hangar where we were operating from. So it was quite difficult because we didn't know the extent of the damage outside the city. First and foremost, it was raining heavily and with a heavy cloud, so small aircrafts couldn't even go out to scout on the populations that are affected. So it took some time for the cloud to clear and for search and rescue to begin. But it looked like an apocalypse, in my opinion.
And what was the first priority for NGOs or humanitarian agencies like us and support and other ones? What was the first point of priority to provide aid? What did you guys want to tackle first?
Yeah, the first thing that we did was to actually rescue people, conduct search and rescue, reconnaissance missions with light aircrafts to see where populations were, people were, and where the government knew the concentration of populations were, to see how they were affected, and then to try and mobilize their rescue using helicopters, different air assets to lift people from high ground, wherever they were, and to bring them to where they could get treatment, especially those who were injured. Mostly because there was no sufficient transport to rescue everyone. We prioritized the elderly, the injured, and the children. So in some instances, parents would just give you their baby and remain behind. So many children were lifted to safety, but separate from their families. So that was the first and most difficult task to do.
Oh, absolutely. And how did we bring about impact to the affected communities and the people?
Yeah, I believe the most important was to give hope, to tell people it will be okay, as difficult as it was, and as hopeless as it was. We have to give hope to people, because what else do you tell someone who has lost everything? Some have lost relatives, have lost families. Many people up to now have never been found. Some were washed away in the water and taken to the sea, never found. I heard of a young man whose father went out fishing and never came back, and many of those really. Some homes were completely washed away. People lost everything they had. They lost their livestock. They lost their beddings. They lost their kitchen equipments, the cups, the plates, everything they had was washed away. And so the first thing was to tell them to have hope, to create hope into the hopeless situation. And I think that's much more important than people think, because without hope, people become anxious and lose the ability to see the future. And once you have that, then people can do anything. In some instances, people would try to riot because of the little food that you would bring to them, but trying to create hope in them and then organize them, get them organized to see, okay, who gets this little food now and who gets next. That's all dependent on how you create hope. You give hope to people. Yeah, so that was a critical task, to try and create hope and give people some form of sanity in the shocking situation they were in, because everybody was traumatized.
So the latest numbers I read about people affected was 2.5 million people were affected by this particular by this disaster. It was said in many news reports that it was the worst disaster to hit the southern hemisphere. 1,000 people were killed. What were your immediate concerns in the form of disease spreading right after the cyclone had hit?
Yeah, I remember the very first, I think in the fourth or fifth day I went out just to tour the city alone, because we couldn't get to all places of the city, all parts of the city.
I'll just start again. I'll just ask them 1 second.
How are you here for?
I will leave on Sunday. I've been around for about 2 weeks.
Oh, you've been here for 2 weeks?
Yeah. I've been at home. I've been sleeping.
Hey?
I've been at home.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I know these people, it's not. Sorry. Talk to...
Back actually?
Oh, sorry. Good?
Yeah.
Talk to us about disease prevention post-cyclone Ida.
The very first few days before we really had a structure of how the response was going to look like, still concentrating on search and rescue, I went across the city in some parts where we could reach, because not all parts were reachable. And in one particular place I found at the hospital in Beira city, at the hospital I found a very sick patient who had diarrhea. And the hospital had lost parts of its roof. I found a clinician, a pharmacist trying to salvage medication which was not wet, and separating it from that which was wet. And she said, this is all we have, so I just have to try and save it, in a building that particular area had lost its roof. And then went to talked to the doctor, and went to one place where there was one patient who had the area, and I automatically knew, knew we had a problem on our case. Other than the area, although they assured me at that time they did not think it was bad, I knew cholera was going to be a subsequent epidemic, a subsequent disaster, because we had so much stagnant water. And where there's stagnant water, you're going to have mosquitoes breeding, and you're going to have fecal material contaminate food and other sources and water. So thereafter, that was a concern, but it didn't take long before we had the first outbreak of cholera. And I'm proud to say that we worked so hard with other humanitarian agencies and the UN to try and bring cholera under control. And that was the biggest worry, because it was going to wipe out large numbers of population, of people. But we were able to contain that within a month, and by the second month, it was completely stalled, which has been one of the biggest successes.
Wow, that's incredible, actually, because like you said, there is one thing surviving a natural disaster, but then the other thing is to survive the disease that goes after it.
Correct.
Could you say that line for me, please? I love that line.
Yeah. Of course, as you know, it's one thing to survive a disaster and come out well, but it's another to survive secondary disasters like a disease that comes after that disaster. So we had anticipated that malaria and cholera were going to be very big issues, and indeed they were big issues and big issues of concern. But with heightened efforts, we were able to bring them under control and lost very few people, which is really good news.
That's amazing. Now, talk to us a little bit about the measures the Mozambique government is putting into place, specifically because Mozambique is very susceptible to climate change. What measures are they putting into place to resettle people, etc.?
Yeah, as you correctly pointed out, Mozambique is one of the most vulnerable countries to the effects of climate change. It has such a huge coastline, a long coastline. It receives cyclones, it receives droughts, it receives floods. So everything is in Mozambique, and disease, of course, is in Mozambique. So we're seeing an increased occurrence of these episodes. For example, in the last 2 years, now we've had three cyclones affect Mozambique. I mean, that's quite a lot to a small country like a poor country like Mozambique, which contributes really minimal greenhouse gases that affect our ozone layer. The poor people don't even know why climate change is affecting them. I mean, they live very basic, they subsist, they live very basic lives, but they get to pay the huge price. Well, the government is trying their best under the circumstances and given the limited resources they have. For example, now they have gazetted new areas where, especially in the areas around Beira and the rural areas around Beira and the peripheries, where the water got up to. They're trying to move people and resettle them in higher ground where the water didn't get. But that can work as far as we know. If a bigger cyclone comes, maybe the water will get there. So that's challenging. We can't really know how the efficacy or the effectiveness of that strategy until another cyclone hits, and we don't know when that will be and how big that will be. Other than that, they're trying to help people get new livelihoods. I mean, people lost a lot. They lost their food crops. They were completely destroyed. Their gardens, their farms were destroyed. So trying to give people a form of a livelihood for them to earn an income that can sustain themselves between now and when they grow food and harvest again, that's cost a lot of money for the government. So those are some of the challenges they're experiencing. But they are also engaged a lot in advocacy for climate change, trying to convince the global world to pay their fair share, because they are paying the Mozambicans are experiencing the consequences, and they're paying a price for something they are not contributing to. So I believe that it will be fair for the international community to really chip in and support countries like Mozambique, because they are the front line. Well, we may ignore them, we may ignore their cries. That front line is going to shift at some time. It doesn't matter where you live, that front line is going to shift. And when it shifts, it will get to where we think it is safe. But I think that as humankind, we have the capacity and the ability to stop that, because that differentiates us humans from other species. Yeah. We have hearts and we feel for each other. And therefore, it doesn't matter whether the person is from Africa and the other one is from Australia. We all think alike and can reach out to one another and support each other in times of adversity like this.
What does life look like currently for the people that were affected by the three cyclones this year? What's normal in Mozambique right now?
It is very difficult because people are still traumatized. A lot of children are traumatized. A lot of children are still separated from their families. Some of them, they lost their families. They don't know where they are. We don't know where they are. So it is very difficult. It's not normal. But people try to make life normal in very difficult circumstances. For example, we try to make children play, just to play, to make them forget what they experienced. But some of them, of course, it's not easy to forget. They fear to sleep because they don't know where they will wake up. They will wake up okay, or another cyclone will come. So it's a traumatic experience they are going through. People are still healing, people are still recovering, but also they are picking up the pieces to recover and reconstruct and get on with life. For example, a lot of buildings in Beira have started receiving new roof, and those that don't have new roof, they patch them over with tarpaulin. So you can see that at least people are working as hard as possible to try and make a difference. The other day, I saw a woman who had lost it all, but she had begun a small business of making pancakes. to sail because she needed to feed her children. And that makes a difference. That gives me hope to see that people are not sitting and waiting, but they're doing something actually to help themselves. And that's life. And for us humanitarian workers, it's every day going out to help someone else. And if we can, that makes the difference and brings a smile to our faces.
Wow. We're going to change tactic a little bit now. We're going to talk about climate change within Southern Africa. And I'll start off with this particular news which we were talking about earlier. So Ethiopia obviously has been in the news all over throughout last week. Story being that they planted 350 million trees in one single day. Australia is paling in comparison as compared to Ethiopia. Could you talk to me about how relevant climate change is as a real issue within the African nations, and how it's paling in comparison possible, and how Australia's inaction is possibly, how would you compare Australia's inaction towards climate change as compared to what Africa is doing?
I really believe that Australia can do better, can punch above its weight, because we have the resources in Australia, we have the expertise, we have the experience in different sectors. I think we can do much better to reach out to countries that are in need and help them to address climate change, issues of climate change mitigation and adaptation. Because once we do that, then we will have solved many more problems. For example, if we address issues of climate change in those countries, we reduce poverty in those countries, then we reduce less people coming into this country that's seeking refugee or shelter or where to be. But also we create more sustainable communities that are empowered where they are, which makes a huge difference. If you look at Southern Africa, really the situation is bad. In as much as we have had cyclones, which have been reported in the media, we have a drought, a serious drought that has been creeping on us since last year. And this has devastated livelihoods, it has devastated food, farms, it has taken out people's crops in large quantities. Right now in southern Angola, we have over 1.6 million people facing a bad drought that need humanitarian assistance. That's southern Angola. Southern Zambia, we have about 2 million people. Lesotho, we have about 40% of the population. South of Mozambique, we have almost 1 million people affected by drought that are in need of humanitarian assistance. Swaziland, the same. So across the entire region, we are seeing this trend. And remember 2015, 2016, we had the largest drought affecting the region, El Nino-induced drought affecting the region that put 40 million people at risk and in need of humanitarian assistance. Right now, it is 36 million people in need of humanitarian assistance, in need of support to address drought effects. So the impact of climate change is so huge. Those countries are struggling. Droughts have become more severe, more intense, but also their occurrences are more shorter. They used to take 10 years, they reduced to 4 years. Now we are seeing almost 2 years space. We are having these droughts. And people may get tired saying, why are these people appealing for aid all the time? Why can't they help themselves? But really, remember, the people in that region contribute less to climate change, to the effects of climate change, but they are experiencing the impact. So that can happen here if it wasn't for wealth. The difference is wealth. Wealthy people will experience less effects because they could always do something else. Whereas the poor people don't have options, don't have choices, they just live on their land, and that's it. Nothing more they don't have resources to adapt and move on to other options. So we really need to do more to support these people because they generate really less effects, contribute less to climate change, but I experience the impact big time.
And when I think I was straight answer you got most.
Can I call you back, Angel? I'm doing an interview. Can I call you back? I'm doing an interview. I'm at World Vision office. Okay. That's my daughter, sorry.
Dad. To pick up from there, so when you go to field and you talk to people who are affected by climate change, normal civilians, residents, what is their grasp on how the climate has changed? Do they have an understanding of climate change and what it means? Is it the same as what it's constructed in the Western world as to how they understand it in the developing world?
Well, an average person doesn't know what climate change is, but they know what has changed in their lives. And that's what bothers them, and that's what matters to them. So they may not know the English words to express climate change, but they will express it to you in the language they understand, and it exactly means climate change. It would translate to climate change if you really analyze what they are saying. They are seeing changes to their way of living. They are seeing reduced harvests to their crops. They are seeing more pests and diseases. For example, we have the fall armyworm that has invaded the region, across the region. It just devastates crops, anything green. It really devastates that. And that's because the temperatures are warming up. And that we never had that in Southern Africa before, but now it's there, and we're just trying to recover from that. Now we have another drought, and we're trying to recover from dealing with the drought. We have a cyclone. So these things are building one over the other, and as a result, they are kind of degrading the adaptation and coping capacities of the communities. Now imagine for a poor person who lives basically on subsistence cropping. They experience an armyworm invasion in 1 year. Then they experience the effects of a cyclone that takes out their crop. And then when they're trying to recover, they experience a drought. It really sends them deeper and deeper into poverty. And they will tell you that. They will tell you, well, we never experienced this until now. Now we have this combination of these effects, these three things. And that really that's what makes a disaster worse. And that's why we need to help people more.
And what measures of World Vision, per se, bringing into providing, what measures is World Vision bringing into place to combat issues relating to climate change within communities?
Well, World Vision, we implement different approaches to try and ease the suffering of the people. First, we provide a humanitarian aid when it is needed. In case of a cyclone, in case of a disaster, the first thing you do is to rescue people who are caught up in the disaster, then treat them, then give them access to food, water, and shelter. Those are basics that we do in every disaster occurrence, in every emergency situation. But we also think long term. We look at post this or before this, what happens to these people? How do we help them to prepare for these kind of calamities? Unfortunately, it's becoming more difficult to predict the magnitude of the calamity, of how the calamity will be like. So sometimes you help them prepare, but then the calamity comes bigger than, like for example, Cyclone Day was bigger than anybody ever thought about to hit the population of Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi. And as such, it washed away whatever had been invested in that community. But we try to give communities strategies that enable them to adapt and change. Other than that, we try to promote community-based solutions to contributing to this global issue of climate change. Whereas climate change is a global issue, communities on the ground can make contributions that actually make a difference. I don't know whether you understand that our ozone layer is made up of oxygen that comes out of air that comes out of plants and goes and covers us as a cloud and protects the sun rays from coming across on Earth. Yeah, and if people can plant more green biomass, if people can plant more trees, then we'll have more oxygen going up in the air, which means we'll be preventing more ozone layer from being depleted, and that means we are mitigating climate change. And of course, evidence shows that ozone layer can heal itself if we stop degrading the land, if we stop producing greenhouse gases, or if we reduce them. And where I know that we depend on industries to advance ourselves, and we cannot deal without them. But we can actually partner with communities. And this is where it makes a difference. Partnering with communities does not take much money, does not take much resources, it's not rocket science, and does not require any form of knowledge. Planting a tree, anybody can. What we need to do is empower them, give them the seedlings, give them the tools, and they will plant trees and make sure that we help government to gazette more land, to have more trees. So we can do that. Even if we don't plant trees, we do other approaches like farmer managed natural regeneration, which is very easy to do and requires very little money.
And has huge impact.
And has huge impact.
Huge impact.
So partnering with communities does not cost much, and I know that Australia can do that, but the effects, the outcomes are bigger, not only for the communities that are affected there, but also for Australia as well.
Thank you very much, sir. Last bunch of questions, and now we change place to Ebola, my favorite topic. So it's been a year. It's been a year since Ebola hit North Kivu. So far, we've lost about 1,800 people. 2,500 people are currently affected by Ebola as it spread into Goma and Rwanda. What are your biggest concerns right now with regards to Ebola?
Well, as you know, Ebola is deadly. The case fatality rates are very high. When you get hit, the chances of death are very high. That concerns me. It concerns me because people move, people migrate, people do business, people travel. So Ebola coming out of North Kivu to other places wouldn't take that long. And as we know, it has now spread to Goma, which is an urban area city, and we have over 700,000 children in Goma. These children are at high risk of contracting Ebola. And once it's in Goma, there is an airport in Goma. Ebola can spread from Goma beyond. Ebola can spread to Australia. Ebola can reach wherever people travel to. So that worries me, that it can move from that small place where it's been contained for some time to become a global problem.
It's interesting. I read yesterday that Goma, the DRC was successful in containing Ebola last year. The situation seems to be quite different on the ground right now. Why is that so? What's going on in the DRC specifically that's spreading the disease?
Yeah. This time, the current outbreak in North Kivu and Ituri regions has been challenging. One of the reasons it's been challenging is that because those regions are very remote, and they have vast remote communities that are not easy to reach, with very poor infrastructure and a collapsed primary health care system that are almost inexistent. In addition, that region is infested with very many armed groups that have been in that region because it's an easy place to hide in because of dense forests and difficult terrain and being cut away from the rest of the country and the rest of the world. Groups kill humanitarian workers because they fear they'll be reported and then they'll be found out where they are and then they can easily be tracked. So that's one dimension. The other dimension, the communities in that area think that Ebola is an imported concept and that it's been brought in so they can take away their resources. Someone wants to mine their resources. DRC is one of the wealthiest countries in terms of minerals. So a small rumor starts and people believe it because there's no media is not as widespread as here. So again, very limited education. DR Congo has been in war for a very, very long time. I mean, since they became independent in the 60s, they have literally never stabilized, and that's a challenge. So, poverty, poor education, lack of consistent and reliable information, insecurity have all combined, and remoteness of the region have all combined to make Ebola in that region lethal, and that's why it has taken longer. For example, when people are traced, people who have been in contact with those who have been infected are traced and taken to health centers, they run away, thinking, oh, now they've taken us there to kill us. They run away and melt into the population again. And of course, as they melt into the population, they become contagious.
It's very interesting that you said that, because my next question was, there are a lot of misconceptions about Ebola, and they're quite harebrained actually. Yep. Could you tell us some of the craziest misconceptions you've heard about the disease?
Now, to understand this, you really have to put yourself in the minds of the people who are in that area. Imagine if you're a person who probably have very limited education or even never achieved primary education, and then you hear someone, maybe your community leader telling you, There were people here who are coming who want to take soil under our feet where we grow our crops because they found that soil is valuable to them somewhere else. We don't know what they use it for. But what they want to do is take us away from our land. And once they take us away from our land, then they can take the soil. Because now we are occupying the land, they can't take away the soil. So, of course, people are going to start thinking, oh, okay, so these people are trying to kill us so they take our land. That's one thing. Then the other one is the armed groups who are fighting the Congolese government. And some of them are not even fighting the Congolese government. They are fighting, for example, the Ugandan government. We have different, the area is infested with different armed groups. Some of them are known. And they fear that if they are found out, if you go to vaccinate, giving vaccines, you are lying, you are spying for the government. Then they'll be found out and they'll be killed. Whatever they are, they will be attacked. So it also complicates the situation. And as such, it makes it difficult for people to go, for humanitarian workers to go to other communities to help the people. You've heard of situations of where humanitarian workers have actually been attacked in their homes and their camps and killed. By the communities, by the rebel groups that are marauding in the area. So it is a very difficult situation. But I know it's possible to beat Ebola.
I mean, there's obviously a vaccine that is available. Is this vaccine being made readily available to affected areas?
Yes. One of the ways, there are many ways, there are many things being done currently to beat the disease, even though the disease has now taken 1 year, the longest ever in the globally outbreak recorded. But one of the prevention methods being used is using the vaccine to ring fence at high risk populations that are at high risk. So they go vaccinating those populations. If there's an outbreak here, they will come and vaccinate everyone here, or immunize everyone here. That means that at least they protect more people from this community being infected, and as such, they can't infect other people. Other than that, World Vision specifically implements a very interesting program called Channels of Hope, where we focus on demystifying the rumors and misunderstanding and misinformation of what the disease is. So we work through community leaders, we work through faith-based organizations like churches and other groups of people, trying to educate them about facts about the disease, how it can be prevented, basic things like sanitation, having good sanitation, washing hands, avoiding, shaking hands, very basic things. The world has woken up to realize that at first there was little attention paid to us for what we're doing, but all of a sudden now everybody is realizing that's effective given the preconceived ideas of misunderstanding of the disease in the region. Now people are actually interested in trying to find out, how do you tell this story? How do you engage these communities? How do you first and foremost bring the community leaders together to sit with you and discuss this, and how do you convince them? So we've been doing that for some time, training community leaders. They go back and train others and then pass the information on and on and on.
Last question, Joseph. What is your one message to the international community, I guess, or the Australian government when it comes to the fight against rural?
Ebola is a nasty disease, but can be prevented, can be beaten if we join hands. Whereas it's right now in DR Congo, in Eastern DR Congo, Ebola can spread very quickly. We saw the previous episodes in West Africa where it went as far as Europe, where it went as far as the US. We don't want that to happen today. We need help to contain Ebola where it is and eliminate this, end this outbreak now. But the Congolese government is a very poor government. As you know, it's been in war for a long time. And we've got to give them credit. They recently had an elected government take over power, the first time ever. And that needs to be solidified, that needs to be supported. And unless we really get governments like Australia support this young government that's trying to nurture democracy by doing basic things like preventing an outbreak of a disease or containing an outbreak of a disease, then we create bigger problems. By not acting, we create bigger problems. By acting, we can easily solve this issue at a very cheaper price, very, very minimal cost. It won't be much from Australia. Probably you wouldn't even compare it to the GDP of Australia. It's very tiny, tiny cost. It can be prevented. Think of just if we had one person come to Australia with Ebola. How much would that impact Australia? How much is that going to cost Australia? Preventing the disease where it is now is much cheaper, much easier, less risky, and we need your support.